I now look to Amy, Gregg, Treasurer, Magdalen and Somerville College to open the case for the opposition.
Thank you, Dan. It's an honour to be speaking here tonight. Populism, at its heart, is a political approach that tries to appeal to ordinary people, an approach which presents the people as a morally good force, juxtaposed with the elite who disregard their concerns and must be challenged. Populism is more than simply appealing to what is popular or relatable. Populism rests on this dialectic of difference, this establishment of two camps, the good us and the bad them. This is something we often associate with the right and is often bound up in reactionary approaches to immigration and globalization. The liberal metropolitan elite are cast as being out of touch with the white working and lower middle classes. The elite's pursuit of a global, multicultural society driven by the interests of capital is cast as disregarding the preferences and politics of the ordinary people. From Donald Trump to Alternative for Germany to UKIP, we recognise the populist right in our day-to-day politics. We see this attempt to align the people against the elite, and immigration is the main unifying tool of difference used to create these camps. And the populist right have had huge electoral success. The tool of difference has, in a practical sense, worked. Trump stormed to victory, defying all expectations of the moderate left in the years preceding his win. The Vote Leave campaign, whilst technically cross-party, was overwhelmingly spearheaded by figures on the British political right and delivered a result that continues to shake Westminster to its core. The right, through their populist rhetoric, have tapped into something powerful, and it is paying dividends. The left seems unable to achieve the same levels of success. So should the left reclaim populism, take the tools popularised by the right and turn them into something they can use to regain support in legislatures across the world? Indeed, we have seen the beginnings of this reclaiming. From Jeremy Corbyn to Bernie Sanders, the left are beginning to wake up to the power of harnessing the will of the people in their rhetoric and campaigns. But populism should not be the future of left-wing politics for three key reasons. Firstly, populism resorts to a tactic of othering that ultimately results in the exclusion of minority groups and the victimisation of the most vulnerable. Secondly, the inherently emotion-driven aspects of populism make it an inappropriate framework for governance. And finally, whatever the practical benefits of populism, politics goes beyond practicality to questions of morality and symbolism. Populism, considering some of the past atrocities carried out in its name, is an inappropriate aspiration for modern left-wing politics. But first, it falls to me to introduce the proposition bench. We have just heard from Brendan McGrath, a second-year PPE student at Oriel College and the Union's librarian. Brendan is someone I've worked closely with these past months. He has many positive qualities, too numerous to fully list tonight, but three things about Brendan have really stood out and warrant mentioning. Stop pulling that face. Firstly, he's extremely efficient. He can churn out multiple speaker invites in a day, fit in 5 coffees before lunch, and following the overturn of the slates ban a couple of weeks ago, he was able to pull together a full team from scratch in a matter of minutes. Secondly, Brendan is extremely diligent. He extensively researches the speakers he interviews, he gets his essays completed on time, and he spends many weeks carefully analysing problems with the union's rules before troubling the returning officer with his concerns. But finally, and I do say this sincerely, Brendan has shown himself to be someone who can acknowledge when he has acted in such a way as to hurt not just a colleague, but a friend, and apologise with sincerity. And for that quality, I am grateful. The second speaker for the proposition is Paul Mason. A British commentator and radio personality, he has written extensively on the direction of left politics. He is the author of Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future. The third and final speaker for the proposition is Brandon Davies. campaign manager for Florida's Democratic candidate for governor, Mayor Andrew Gillum, he was previously the DNC's chief of staff. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. Now, as mentioned, populism relies on the concept of the people. Now, I'm not a PPEist, and I'm not going to attempt to delve too deeply into the specifics of a fundamentally contested and indeterminate concept. But the people generally points towards an idea of the masses, the ordinary man and woman in the street, the everyday citizens who don't occupy the top of the ladder or wield great political power. The problem with constructing the people, however, is that the people must exist in juxtaposition to something else. Populism therefore necessarily relies upon an otherizing imaginary, where the other is blamed, faulted, and identified as the root of the problems that befall the people. This alienates those who do not fall within the category of the people, and this is fundamentally harmful in two ways. Firstly, this necessary process of othering directly harms some of the most vulnerable. As populism looks for an enemy to pit the people against, it does not always settle on a corrupt 1% or a political elite protected by swathes of privilege and wealth. Historically, minorities and disadvantaged groups are scapegoated as the cause of the people's ills. Immigrants, Jewish people, people of colour. And this is not exclusively the purview of right-wing populism. It is inherent to populism itself. Many of the self-styled Lexiteer leaders have bought into and propagated the exact same anti-immigrant rhetoric we see on the right. In the US, the Bernie bros, the generally young, white and male supporters of rising populist Bernie Sanders, would hound Clinton supporters with misogyny and racism across social media during her presidential campaign. When the left adopts the right's tools of populism, the victims remain the same. However much the left may protest that it is different and that it is repurposing these tools for a worthy cause, harms arise. The proposition may say that the left populism can avoid this, that the only ones othered need be the liberal metropolitan elites who we should rightly rail against, challenge and force to change. But this is the second way in which the process of othering is fundamentally both harmful and contradictory. By presenting the elite as a homogenous group that works against the will of the people, it becomes impossible to find a constructive solution to the problems that afflict the non-elite without a whole-scale ousting of the current political class. If we do nothing but hound the perceived elites, we cannot hope to engage with them and change them. Populism may propel people to positions of power, but unless the populace are willing to commit to something just shy of a revolution, conflict will always triumph over compromise. And if the outcome is the whole-scale substitution of the current political class with populist leaders, we reach an insurmountable contradiction. The populace, by virtue of now holding the political power, become the elite, and the movement's element of different collapses. The people remain voiceless. The subaltern cannot speak. The only viable long-term strategy can be for the populist leaders to continue to suggest that the true elite are waiting in the wings to reclaim power from the people and their populist representatives, and we end up with a toxic politics of paranoia. This brings me on to my second point, which centres on the nature of populism itself. Populism is inherently a emotion-driven mode of reasoning, and there is a place for emotion in politics. We are human, and fear, empathy, hope, and selfishness necessarily shape our priorities and our actions alongside objective assessments of cause and effect. Human nature and feeling should not and cannot be ousted from the political process, as perhaps the Remainers with their endless calculations and appeals to cool rationality found to their peril. However, the sheer weight given to feeling an emotional response by populism makes it an inappropriate model for the future of left-wing politics. In the populist moment, politics becomes impassioned, confrontational, angry and unpredictable, dispensing with all the rules and expectations that have governed liberal democracies since the 1970s. And in a political model that almost entirely eschews objectivity for emotionalism, there is no way for egalitarianism and abstract concepts like justice to edge out the narrow-mindedness and irrationality of only appealing to popular sentiment. A case in point, the enemies of the people. This was the label given by the self-styled populist Daily Mail to 3 judges who ruled on the technical question of whether the Constitution of the United Kingdom permitted the government to use the royal prerogative to invoke Article 50. The paper claimed the decision purposely defied 17.4 million Brexit voters, stirring anger further with dog whistle homophobia when labelling one of the judges a openly gay ex-Olympic fencer. Never mind the fact that these judges were simply doing their job, determining the legal status of a certain course of action. Populism creates enemies of anyone purportedly contravening the people's will. It has no room for the rule of law or legal certainty. It is mob rule dressed up as the people's voice and risks undermining some of the most fundamental tenements of due process. This brings me on to my third and final point, which addresses the practical effectiveness of populism. It is hard to deny that the populist right has made sweeping gains in politics over the past few years. It is easy to see the temptation for the left to tap into this seemingly golden opportunity to gain traction and popularity. And where the left have delved into this tactic, the results have seemed promising. Following the 2017 snap general election, under Corbyn, Labour's 9.6 vote swing was the largest since 1945. But the political is not won and lost merely on grounds of so-called practicality. It is a moral and symbolic fight. For the left to give in to using the tools that have supported some of the worst atrocities and errors of recent history is inherently unjust. It was populism that mobilized the anger of the middle classes against the government and big businesses during the pre-Nazi Weimar period, laying the foundations of the fascist movement that followed. It is populism that now sees migrant children detained in Texas border camps to the cries of "build a wall." Populism is not the answer. The grievances of ordinary people are real and have for too long not been taken seriously. People feel disenfranchised, disillusioned, and ignored by Westminster, by the 1%, and by the media. And it is crucial, from both a practical and moral perspective, that these concerns are addressed fully and rapidly. But populism, the ruthless pitting of the people against the other, us against them, is not the future. It is a path to exclusion, a path that places too much power in emotion, and a path that loses the moral fight. The left must become better, as the movement that claims to speak for the disadvantaged, to protect the vulnerable, and to champion the non-elite. But populism is not the path for the left to take. Thank you.